Marcus Steele Rodriguez never imagined that stopping to help a stranded motorist would land him in handcuffs. The 34-year-old mechanic from Bakersfield had just finished a late shift at his garage when he spotted smoke billowing from under the hood of a sedan on Highway 58. What he didn't know was that this single act of kindness would trigger a chain of events that would expose corruption in the Kern County court system and unite 350 leather-clad bikers in the most unprecedented courthouse protest California had ever witnessed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening of October 15th started like any other for Marcus Rodriguez. Thunder rumbled in the distance as he locked up Rodriguez Auto Repair, the small garage he'd inherited from his father 3 years earlier. The Harley-Davidson Sportster gleamed under the streetlight as he climbed aboard, its chrome reflecting the neon glow of nearby shops along Chester Avenue. Marcus had always been different from the stereotypical biker image. While his leather vest bore the colors of the Devil's Disciples Motorcycle Club, his weekdays were spent with grease under his fingernails, rebuilding engines and helping families keep their vehicles running. The club wasn't about crime or chaos. They organized charity rides for children's hospitals and maintained memorials for fallen veterans. Marcus served as their road captain, responsible for planning safe routes and ensuring newer members understood the Brotherhood's values. The rain began to fall as he merged onto Highway 58, heading toward his modest apartment in East Bakersfield. The October weather had been unpredictable, with sudden downpours that made the asphalt treacherous for motorcycles. Marcus kept his speed steady, his experienced hands gripping the handlebars with the confidence that came from 15 years of riding. That's when he saw the smoke. A dark blue Toyota Camry sat, disabled on the shoulder, about 2 miles past the Cottonwood Road exit. White smoke poured from beneath its hood, and hazard lights blinked frantically through the rain. Marcus could see a figure hunched over the steering wheel. A woman, it appeared, possibly elderly. Without hesitation, he signaled and pulled over, parking his Harley safely behind the stranded vehicle. Elena Vasquez, a 68-year-old retired teacher, looked up with tear-filled eyes as Marcus approached her driver's side window. She'd been driving home from her grandson's soccer game in Delano when the engine began overheating. Her cell phone showed no signal, and the dark highway stretched endlessly in both directions. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus," he said, removing his helmet and revealing a kind face framed by a neatly trimmed beard. "Looks like you're having some trouble. I'm a mechanic. Mind if I take a look?" Elena's initial apprehension melted away as she observed Marcus's gentle demeanor and professional approach. He spent the next 20 minutes diagnosing the problem, a burst radiator hose, and helped her contact her son using his cell phone. While they waited for the tow truck, Marcus retrieved a reflective emergency blanket from his motorcycle's saddlebag and helped Elena stay warm. Neither of them noticed the California Highway Patrol cruiser that had stopped approximately 200 yards behind Marcus's bike. Officer Bradley Hutchins sat in his vehicle for several minutes, running Marcus's license plate through the system. When the results came back clean, Hutchins should have continued his patrol. Instead, something about the scene ahead triggered his suspicion. Hutchins had developed a particular animosity toward motorcycle clubs during his 8 years with the CHP. 2 years earlier, he'd been passed over for a promotion after a complaint was filed against him for excessive force during a traffic stop involving members of the Iron Wolves MC. Though the complaint had been dismissed, Hutchins blamed the bikers for damaging his career prospects. The sight of Marcus's club colors was enough to convince him that something illicit must be occurring. The tow truck arrived first, operated by Jimmy Patterson, a 52-year-old veteran who'd known Elena's family for decades. As Jimmy hooked up the Camry, he chatted with Marcus about motorcycles. His own son rode a Honda Shadow and had been considering joining a club. Elena repeatedly thanked Marcus for his kindness, insisting on giving him $20 for gas money. which he politely declined. Officer Hutchins finally approached as the tow truck was preparing to leave with Elena's vehicle. His hand rested on his service weapon as he demanded to see Marcus's identification and registration. The aggressive tone immediately put everyone on edge. "What's the nature of your business here?" Hutchins asked, his flashlight beam dancing across Marcus's face. Marcus explained the situation calmly, with Eleanor and Jimmy corroborating every detail. He presented his driver's license, motorcycle registration, and proof of insurance, all current and legitimate. Elena even showed Officer Hutchins the business card Marcus had given her, which contained only his garage's information and his offer to help if her car needed additional repairs. But Hutchins wasn't satisfied. He claimed to smell marijuana, though both Elena and Jimmy would later testify that no such odor was present. When Marcus consented to a search of his motorcycle, Hutchins discovered nothing more incriminating than basic tools, a first aid kit, and energy bars. The officer then demanded Marcus submit to a field sobriety test. The roadside tests proved Marcus was completely sober. His blood alcohol content registered 0.00, and he passed every coordination exercise flawlessly. Frustrated but unwilling to admit error, Hutchins made a decision that would haunt the Kern County justice system for months to come. "You're under arrest for public intoxication and interfering with traffic flow," Hutchins announced, producing handcuffs. Elena gasped in disbelief. Jimmy Patterson stepped forward, his voice rising in protest. "Officer, this man was helping a stranded motorist." "There's no crime here." Hutchins ignored them both, roughly cuffing Marcus and reading him his rights. As he was loaded into the patrol car, Marcus caught Elena's eye and mouthed, "It's okay." He dealt with prejudiced law enforcement before and assumed the charges would be dropped once cooler heads prevailed. Marcus spent the night in Kern County Jail, sharing a cell with two men arrested for actual crimes. Word of his detention spread quickly through the Devil's Disciples network. Club president Danny Wrench Sullivan had dealt with false arrests before, but something about this case felt different. The circumstances were too clean, too obviously fabricated. Sullivan contacted Rebecca Chen, a defense attorney who'd successfully represented bikers in previous cases. Chen arrived at the jail early the next morning, expecting to handle a routine bond hearing and dismissal. What she discovered, instead, was a prosecutorial system determined to make an example out of Marcus Rodriguez, District Attorney Patricia. Morganton had built her career on being tough on crime, though critics argued she was simply tough on anyone who didn't fit Bakersfield's conservative image. When the Rodriguez case landed on her desk, she saw an opportunity to send a message to motorcycle clubs throughout Central California. Despite the overwhelming evidence of Marcus's innocence, Morganton authorized additional charges: obstruction of justice and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. The conspiracy charge was particularly egregious. It was based solely on Officer Hutchins's claim that Marcus had been suspiciously loitering near the highway, a location supposedly used by drug traffickers. No drugs were found. No evidence of trafficking existed. The charge was pure fiction, but it carried a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years in state prison. Rebecca Chen filed motion after motion demanding the charges be dismissed. Elena Vasquez submitted a sworn affidavit describing Marcus's kindness and confirming that he had never engaged in any illegal activity. Jimmy Patterson provided similar testimony. Even the tow truck company's GPS logs proved that Marcus had been at the scene for exactly the amount of time it took to diagnose Elena's got trouble and arrange for help. None of it mattered. To Judge Harrison Blackwood, Blackwood had served on the Kern County Superior Court bench for 12 years, earning a reputation for harsh sentences and little patience for defendants he deemed undesirable. His disdain for motorcycle culture was well known among local attorneys, stemming from a personal incident involving his teenage daughter and a biker she'd dated against his wishes. During the preliminary hearing, Judge Blackwood refused to allow Elena's testimony, claiming it was irrelevant to the charges at hand. He dismissed the GPS evidence as potentially manipulated and accepted Officer Hutchins' account without question. Despite its obvious inconsistencies, the trial was a foregone conclusion. With key evidence excluded and witness testimony limited, Rebecca Chen fought valiantly but futilely. The jury, selected from a pool of conservative Kern County residents with little sympathy for bikers, deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Judge Blackwood's sentencing hearing was scheduled for November 3rd. As Marcus sat in his cell, contemplating the possibility of spending the next decade in prison for helping a stranded motorist, word of his case had begun spreading far beyond Kern County. Social media posts, local news coverage, and motorcycle club networks were carrying the story across California and into neighboring states. The Devil's Disciples weren't the only ones paying attention. Marcus Rodriguez had become a symbol of something much larger than a single wrongful conviction. He represented every biker who'd ever faced discrimination, every citizen who'd been failed by a corrupt system, and every person who'd ever been punished for doing the right thing. November 3rd arrived with an unusual chill in the air, as if the weather itself sensed the injustice about to unfold. The Kern County Superior Courthouse, an imposing structure of concrete and glass on Truxton Avenue, buzzed with more activity than usual. Court reporters whispered among themselves about the unusual number of leather-clad individuals gathering in the parking lot across the street. Marcus Rodriguez sat in the defendant's chair wearing the only suit he owned, a navy blue ensemble. His mother had bought him for his father's funeral. The orange jail uniform had been replaced, but the shackles around his ankles remained, a constant reminder of how far his life had spiraled from that rainy night on Highway 58. Rebecca Chen shuffled through her papers one final time, knowing her sentencing arguments would fall on deaf ears. She'd filed appeals to the state level, contacted civil rights organizations, and even reached out to investigative journalists. But today's hearing would proceed regardless, and Judge Blackwood held all the power. What neither Chen nor Marcus knew was that the courthouse had become the focal point of the largest motorcycle rights demonstration in California history. Danny Sullivan had spent 3 weeks coordinating what the Devil's Disciples were calling Operation Rolling Thunder. The club's network extended far beyond Bakersfield, connecting with chapters throughout the state and affiliated clubs across the Southwest. Sullivan's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the guilty verdict. Brothers from Fresno, Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, and even Las Vegas were asking how they could help. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The plan was simple but unprecedented. Every major motorcycle club in California would send representatives to Bakersfield for Marcus's sentencing. They wouldn't break any laws, wouldn't threaten anyone, and wouldn't give authorities any excuse to arrest them. They would simply show up, in numbers too large to ignore, and bear witness to injustice. Tiger Jenkins, president of the Riverside chapter of the Iron Wolves, had driven through the night with 14 of his brothers. Their motorcycles formed a perfect V formation as they rumbled down Highway 99, their engines creating a thunder that announced their approach from miles away. Jenkins had never met Marcus Rodriguez, but the principle mattered more than personal connections. "This ain't about one man," Jenkins told his riders during a fuel stop in Delano. "This is about every time some badge-heavy cop decides we're guilty because of what we wear. This is about showing them we won't disappear quietly." Similar convoys were converging on Bakersfield from every direction. The Sacramento Saints, the Modesto Mayhem, the Ventura Vikings, clubs that typically maintained polite distances, were united by a common cause. Social media posts documented their journeys with hashtags like Justice for Marcus and Chuck Biker Rights. Local law enforcement scrambled to respond. Bakersfield Police Chief Amanda Torres, called an emergency meeting with California Highway Patrol commanders and Kern County Sheriff's deputies. Intelligence reports suggested over 300 bikers were heading toward the courthouse. But no credible threats of violence had been detected. These aren't criminal organizations. Lieutenant Sarah Fernandez reported to the assembled commanders. Our gang unit has been monitoring the chatter. They're organizing a peaceful demonstration. Most of these clubs have never even had legal troubles beyond traffic violations. Chief Torres made a calculated decision. Rather than treat the bikers as a threat, she would deploy officers to manage traffic and maintain order. Extra security would be present, but the demonstration would be allowed to proceed as long as it remained peaceful. Inside courtroom 7, Judge Blackwood was oblivious to the gathering storm. He'd arrived early to review Marcus's case file one final time, confirming his intention to impose the maximum sentence allowed under California law. Blackwood viewed himself as a guardian of community values, and motorcycle clubs represented everything he despised about modern society's decline. Elena Vasquez sat in the gallery's front row, accompanied by her son Miguel and daughter-in-law Carmen. She'd driven to Bakersfield against her family's wishes, determined to witness the conclusion of the case that had haunted her conscience for weeks. The elderly teacher had spent sleepless nights replaying that rainy evening, wondering if she could have done something differently to prevent Marcus's arrest. At 9:47 a.m., the first wave of motorcycles arrived. Court security guard Dennis Walsh was enjoying his morning coffee when the sound reached him, a low rumble that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Through the courthouse windows, he watched in amazement as dozens of Harley-Davidsons, Indians, and custom choppers filled the parking lot across Truxtun Avenue. The bikers dismounted with military precision. They removed their helmets, secured their motorcycles, and formed orderly groups on the sidewalk. Many carried small American flags. Some held handwritten signs reading, "Justice for Marcus," and "Good Samaritans shouldn't face prison." Others simply stood silently, their presence speaking louder than any words. News crews arrived within minutes. Quebec TV reporter Jessica Martinez had covered courthouse proceedings for 5 years, but she'd never seen anything like this. Her cameraman struggled to capture the scope of the demonstration as more motorcycles continued arriving. This is Jessica Martinez, reporting live from the Kern County Courthouse, where an estimated 200 motorcycle enthusiasts have gathered to protest the sentencing of Marcus Rodriguez. The Bakersfield man convicted of helping a stranded motorist, she reported breathlessly into her microphone. But Martinez's count was already outdated. The second wave had arrived. Phoenix Thunderbirds president Carlos Diesel Moreno led a contingent of Arizona bikers who'd ridden through the night. Their arrival was announced by the distinctive sound of modified exhausts echoing off downtown buildings. Behind them came clubs from Nevada, New Mexico, and even a small group from Colorado who'd heard about the case through social media. Rebecca Chen stepped onto the courthouse steps for a brief recess and froze. The sight before her defied belief. Hundreds of bikers lined both sides of Truxtun Avenue, their motorcycles creating rivers of chrome and steel that stretched for blocks. American flags fluttered from radio antennas and sissy bars. The crowd was diverse, men and women of all ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds united by their shared identity and sense of justice. "Holy hell," she whispered, pulling out her phone to text Danny Sullivan. "How many people did you call?" Sullivan's response came immediately. "Word travels fast in our world. This is bigger than anything we planned." Inside the courthouse, Judge Blackwood remained unaware of the demonstration. Court staff had been instructed not to discuss external matters during proceedings, and his chambers faced the building's rear parking lot. He reviewed his sentencing notes, planning to deliver a stern lecture about respect for law enforcement and the consequences of criminal behavior. The third wave arrived at 10:15 a.m., just minutes before the hearing was scheduled to resume. The Hells Angels Oakland chapter made their entrance with characteristic flair. Their formation was perfect, their motorcycles gleaming despite the long ride south. Chapter President Big Mike Patterson, no relation to the tow truck driver, had initially been reluctant to participate. The Angels typically avoided public demonstrations. But Marcus's case had struck a nerve throughout the motorcycle community, and even the most insular clubs recognized the broader implications. Behind the Oakland Angels came chapters from San Francisco, San Jose, and Stockton. Their arrival pushed the demonstration's size past 350 participants, transforming the courthouse area into a sea of leather and denim. Local businesses closed their doors, not from fear, but from sheer amazement at the spectacle unfolding outside their windows. Television helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing images that would be broadcast across the nation within hours. CNN, Fox News, and major networks interrupted regular programming to cover the unprecedented demonstration. Court bailiff Thomas Rodriguez, no relation to Marcus, knocked on Judge Blackwood's chamber door at 10:28 a.m. "Your Honor, we have a situation developing outside." "Perhaps you should take a look." Judge Blackwood walked to his office window and peered through the blinds. What he saw below caused his coffee cup to slip from his fingers, shattering on the floor. 350 motorcycles filled every available parking space, lined the streets, and extended beyond his field of vision. Their riders stood in silent formation, many with their hands clasped behind their backs in a posture of respectful attention. For the first time in his judicial career, Harrison Blackwood understood that his decision would be witnessed by forces beyond his courtroom walls. The atmosphere inside courtroom 7 crackled with tension as the hearing resumed. Elena Vasquez gripped her rosary beads, whispering prayers in Spanish. Rebecca Chen felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, even though the demonstrators remained outside. Marcus sat straighter in his chair, somehow sensing that he was no longer alone in this fight. Judge Blackwood's voice carried a slight tremor as he called the court to order, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines serving as an ominous soundtrack to the proceedings about to unfold. Judge Blackwood's hands trembled slightly as he shuffled the sentencing documents on his desk. The sound of 350 motorcycle engines idling outside created a low, persistent hum that seemed to penetrate the courthouse's thick walls. Court security had discreetly increased their presence in the hallway, but everyone understood that no amount of guards could handle the crowd gathered beyond the building's doors. Rebecca Chen rose to address the court, her voice carrying newfound strength. The knowledge that hundreds of people had traveled from across the Southwest to support her client gave weight to her words that legal precedent alone could not provide. "Your Honor, Marcus Rodriguez stands before you today as a man whose only crime was showing compassion to a stranger in distress. The evidence presented during this trial has been thoroughly discredited. Officer Hutchins's testimony contains multiple inconsistencies that even the prosecution couldn't adequately explain." She gestured toward Elena Vasquez in the gallery. "Mrs. Vasquez has traveled here today to once again tell the truth about what happened on Highway 58. My client stopped to help her when her car broke down. He diagnosed the problem using his professional expertise as a mechanic. He helped her contact family members and stayed with her until assistance arrived. These are the actions of a good Samaritan, not a criminal." District Attorney Patricia Morganton shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Through the courtroom's windows, she could see news vans lining the street. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. This case had spiraled far beyond her control, transforming from a routine prosecution into a media circus that threatened to overshadow her entire career. "Furthermore," Chen continued, "the conspiracy charges filed against Mr. Rodriguez are not supported by a single piece of physical evidence. No drugs were found. No communications with alleged co-conspirators were discovered. The entire case rests on the unsupported claims of an officer whose own personnel file contains multiple complaints for misconduct. Marcus watched his attorney with quiet admiration. Rebecca Chen had fought for him when the entire system seemed determined to destroy his life. He thought about his elderly mother, Rosa, who was too frail to attend the hearing but had spent weeks praying for his freedom. He thought about his employees at the garage, loyal men who'd kept the business running during his incarceration. Outside, Danny Sullivan monitored police radio frequencies through a handheld scanner. The transmissions revealed growing concern among law enforcement commanders about the demonstration's size and scope. Bakersfield police had called for mutual aid from surrounding jurisdictions, but the requests were precautionary rather than urgent. The bikers had maintained perfect discipline, standing quietly in formation without a single incident of misconduct. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, crackled through Sullivan's radio. "I've got eyes on the courthouse crowd. No signs of agitation or illegal activity. They're just standing there. It's actually pretty remarkable." Tiger Jenkins approached Sullivan with an update from the perimeter teams. Phoenix PD called in a helicopter to monitor the situation. "Media count is up to 8 news crews now. Word is spreading fast. Social media posts are going viral. The demonstration had indeed captured national attention." Justice for Marcus was trending on Twitter, accompanied by photos and videos of the peaceful protest. Motorcycle enthusiasts from across the country were sharing the story, expressing solidarity with Marcus and outrage at his treatment. The narrative had transcended local politics to become a symbol of broader issues regarding profiling, judicial bias, and the right to help others without fear of persecution. Inside the courtroom, Judge Blackwood finally spoke, his usual authoritative tone subdued by the extraordinary circumstances. "Ms. Chen, your client was found guilty by a jury of his peers on all charges presented. This court recognizes the unusual level of public interest in this case, but justice cannot be swayed by external pressure, regardless of its magnitude." The judge's words carried less conviction than usual. Through his peripheral vision, he could see the crowd through the courtroom windows, hundreds of people who had traveled hundreds of miles to witness this moment. Many held American flags or handmade signs. Their silent presence spoke louder than any courtroom argument. Rebecca Chen seized the opening. "Your Honor, I respectfully submit that true justice requires acknowledging when our system has failed. The evidence clearly demonstrates my client's innocence. Mrs. Vasquez has provided sworn testimony confirming that Mr. Rodriguez performed an act of kindness that should be commended, not criminalized." Elena Vasquez stood up in the gallery, her voice shaking but determined. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Judge Blackwood hesitated. Allowing victim statements during sentencing was standard procedure, but Elena's testimony would support the defendant rather than the prosecution. The unusual nature of the case seemed to demand flexibility from normal protocols. "You may address the court." Mrs. Vasquez, the elderly teacher, walked slowly to the witness stand, her cane tapping against the courtroom's marble floor. The gallery fell silent as she raised her right hand and was sworn in for what everyone understood would be crucial testimony. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm 68 years old, and I taught elementary school in Delano for 38 years. On the night of October 15th, my car broke down on Highway 58. I was scared and alone in the dark when Marcus Rodriguez stopped to help me." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "This young man spent 20 minutes diagnosing my car's problem. He helped me call my son. He gave me a blanket to stay warm while we waited for the tow truck. He refused to accept money for his kindness. Officer Hutchins arrived after everything was resolved and arrested Marcus for no reason I could understand." Eleanor turned to face Judge Blackwood directly. "Your Honor, I have lived in this county for 40 years. I have seen good people and bad people. Marcus Rodriguez is one of the good ones. If we punish people for showing kindness to strangers, what kind of society are we creating?" The courtroom remained silent as Elena returned to her seat. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, seemingly mesmerized by the elderly woman's quiet dignity and moral authority. Outside, the crowd had grown restless, not aggressive, but increasingly vocal. Spontaneous chants of justice for Marcus began rippling through the assembled bikers. The sound carried through the courthouse windows like distant thunder, a reminder that the entire nation was watching this small courtroom in Bakersfield. California News helicopters continued circling overhead, while television reporters provided live updates to millions of viewers. The story had captured public imagination in ways that surprised even seasoned journalists. Social media analytics showed engagement levels typically associated with major national crises or celebrity scandals. Judge Blackwood called for a brief recess, ostensibly to review his notes, but actually to collect his thoughts. The magnitude of the situation had overwhelmed his usual judicial confidence. In his chambers, he stared out the window at the sea of motorcycles and leather-clad demonstrators. Phone messages from superior court administrators, state judicial officials, and even his wife urged caution and careful consideration. District Attorney Morganton used the recess to confer with her staff. The prosecution team had monitored social media throughout the morning, watching their case become a national symbol of prosecutorial overreach. Several prominent legal commentators had already published op-eds questioning the charges against Marcus Rodriguez. "Patricia, we need to consider our options," advised Deputy District Attorney Frank Garrison. "The appeals court is going to scrutinize every aspect of this case. If we're overturned on appeal, it'll be even worse for the office." Morganton knew Garrison was right, but her pride prevented easy retreat. She'd built her career on never backing down from difficult prosecutions. Admitting error now would invite questions about every controversial case she'd ever handled. When court resumed, Judge Blackwood's demeanor had subtly shifted. The overwhelming presence of the demonstration, combined with Elena Vasquez's powerful testimony, had planted seeds of doubt about the path he'd been determined to follow. "Mr. Rodriguez, please stand for sentencing." Marcus rose slowly, his shackles rattling softly in the silent courtroom. Rebecca Chen placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. In the gallery, Elena Vasquez clutched her rosary beads, while dozens of supporters held their breath. The moment that would define not only Marcus Rodriguez's future, but also the relationship between law enforcement and motorcycle communities throughout California had finally arrived. Judge Blackwood's voice barely rose above a whisper as he began the sentencing pronouncement. The weight of 350 pairs of eyes pressing against the courthouse walls seemed to compress the very air in courtroom 7. Marcus Rodriguez stood perfectly still, his fate hanging in the balance of words not yet spoken. "Marcus Rodriguez, you have been found guilty of public intoxication, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. These are serious charges that this court cannot take lightly." Outside, the crowd sensed the gravity of the moment. Danny Sullivan raised his hand, and the spontaneous chanting gradually died away. The only sounds were the distant hum of idling motorcycles and the whir of news helicopters overhead. Even the media crews lowered their voices, understanding that history was being written in real time. Rebecca Chen's heart raced as she watched Judge Blackwood's face for any sign of his intentions. The judge's usual stern demeanor had been replaced by something she'd never seen before: genuine uncertainty. The man who had built his reputation on harsh sentences and unwavering authority appeared to be grappling with forces beyond his courtroom experience. "However," Judge Blackwood continued, his voice gaining slight strength, "this court has also heard compelling testimony regarding the circumstances surrounding these charges." Elena Vasquez leaned forward in her seat, her weathered hands gripping the wooden pew. The elderly teacher had taught thousands of children about right and wrong during her career, but she'd never seen the concepts tested as dramatically as they were being tested today. Judge Blackwood cleared his throat and looked directly at Marcus for the first time during the hearing. Mrs. Vasquez's testimony has been illuminating. Her account of the events on Highway 58 paints a picture very different from the one presented by the prosecution. District Attorney Patricia Morganton felt her stomach drop. The judge's tone suggested a direction she hadn't anticipated. In her peripheral vision, she could see news cameras focused on her face through the courtroom windows. Any reaction would be recorded and analyzed by legal experts within hours. Furthermore, the judge continued, "This court cannot ignore the extraordinary show of support for the defendant gathered outside our building today. While public opinion cannot and should not determine judicial decisions, the peaceful nature of this demonstration speaks to the character of the communities that Mr. Rodriguez represents." Tiger Jenkins smiled grimly from his position across the street. The judge was clearly struggling with the political implications of his decision. Word was spreading through the crowd via text messages and whispered conversations that something unexpected might be developing inside the courthouse. Judge Blackwood set down his prepared sentencing notes, the harsh statement he'd crafted the night before, and spoke from his heart for perhaps the first time in his judicial career. The evidence presented during this trial has raised serious questions about the validity of the charges brought against Mr. Rodriguez. Officer Hutchins's testimony contained inconsistencies that even the prosecution struggled to explain. The physical evidence supporting the conspiracy charges is non-existent. Most troubling, the circumstances described by Mrs. Vasquez suggest that Mr. Rodriguez was engaged in an act of good citizenship when he was arrested. Marcus felt his knees weaken. The judge's words carried hope he hadn't dared to feel since his arrest 6 weeks earlier. Rebecca Chen squeezed his shoulder, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her professional composure. This court has spent considerable time reviewing similar cases from jurisdictions throughout California. The precedent for overturning jury verdicts based on insufficient evidence is well established, though rarely invoked. The courtroom held its collective breath. Even the court reporter's fingers had stilled above her keyboard, sensing that the next words would be the most important of the entire proceeding. Judge Blackwood stood up, his black robes rustling in the silence. "It is the judgment of this court that the jury's verdict was based on incomplete and misleading information. The charges against Marcus Rodriguez are hereby dismissed. All convictions are overturned. Mr. Rodriguez, you are free to go." The courtroom erupted. Elena Vasquez burst into tears, her hands raised toward the ceiling in gratitude. Rebecca Chen embraced Marcus so tightly that his shackles clinked against her briefcase. Gallery spectators who had maintained courthouse decorum throughout the trial now cheered and applauded without restraint. Outside, the news spread through the crowd like wildfire. Danny Sullivan's radio crackled with reports from spotters positioned throughout downtown Bakersfield. "Charges dismissed. Marcus is free." The response was immediate and thunderous. 350 motorcycles roared to life simultaneously, their engines creating a symphony of celebration that echoed off every building within a mile radius. News crews scrambled to capture the crowd's reaction. Reporters who had covered countless courthouse stories struggled to describe the scene unfolding before them. Hardened bikers embraced each other, many with tears streaming down their weathered faces. American flags waved in the afternoon breeze as horns honked and voices shouted in triumph. Inside the courthouse, bailiffs worked quickly to remove Marcus's shackles. The young mechanic rubbed his wrists, still processing the sudden reversal of fortune that had transformed him from a convicted felon facing years in prison to a free man in the span of minutes. Judge Blackwood approached the defense table, an unprecedented gesture that surprised everyone in the courtroom. "Mr. Rodriguez, I want to personally apologize for what you've endured. The system failed you, and I bear responsibility for that failure." Marcus looked up at the judge, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Your Honor. I never lost faith that the truth would come out eventually." Elena Vasquez made her way to the defense table, moving as quickly as her cane would allow. When she reached Marcus, she pulled him into a grandmother's embrace that spoke to the bond forged between them on that rainy night 6 weeks earlier. "Mijo, I'm so sorry this happened to you because you helped me," she whispered in his ear. Marcus shook his head. "Mrs. Vasquez, I'd do it again tomorrow. That's what decent people do for each other." Rebecca Chen gathered her files while fielding calls from legal colleagues across the state. The Rodriguez case would be studied in law schools for years to come as an example of how community pressure and moral clarity could overcome institutional bias. Her phone showed dozens of missed calls from reporters seeking interviews and commentary. District Attorney Morganton slipped out of the courtroom through a side exit, avoiding the media crews positioned near the main entrance. Her political career had just suffered a devastating blow that would haunt future campaigns. The Rodriguez prosecution would be remembered as a textbook example of prosecutorial overreach, driven by prejudice rather than evidence. Outside, the celebration continued as news helicopters captured aerial footage of the massive crowd. The images would be broadcast around the world, showing hundreds of bikers raising their fists in victory while American flags fluttered from radio antennas and handlebars. Carlos Diesel Moreno from Phoenix had tears in his eyes as he called his wife with the news. "Justice won today, Maria. For once, the good guys actually won." Tiger Jenkins organized the departing convoys, ensuring that visiting clubs could exit Bakersfield safely and efficiently. The demonstration had achieved its purpose without a single arrest or incident of violence. The bikers had proven that their communities could organize massive protests while maintaining perfect discipline and respect for law. As Marcus Rodriguez walked down the courthouse steps as a free man, 350 motorcycle engines revved in salute. The sound was deafening, but it was also beautiful. A mechanical choir singing hymns of justice and vindication. Danny Sullivan approached Marcus with a huge grin and a leather vest bearing the Devil's Disciples' colors. "Brother, this belongs to you. You've earned it 10 times over." Marcus accepted the vest with humility and pride. The brotherhood that had supported him through his darkest hour had proven that loyalty and justice could triumph over corruption and prejudice. The convoy that escorted Marcus Rodriguez home that evening stretched for miles along Highway 58, passing the exact spot where his nightmare had begun 6 weeks earlier. This time, however, he wasn't alone on that dark stretch of road. He was surrounded by brothers and sisters who had traveled across the Southwest to ensure that good would triumph over evil. The Marcus Rodriguez case would be remembered as the day 350 bikers changed the course of justice in Kern County, California, proving that sometimes the most powerful force in America is ordinary people refusing to accept injustice. 3 months after the courthouse victory, Marcus Rodriguez stood in the doorway of his expanded garage, watching his newest employee, Tommy Guerrero, rebuild a transmission on a 1995 Chevy Silverado. The young man had walked into Rodriguez Auto Repair 2 weeks earlier, desperate for work and carrying nothing but a backpack and a story about aging out of the foster care system. "Torque specs on that bell housing are 35 foot-pounds," Marcus called out, wiping grease from his hands with a shop rag. "Don't over-tighten it or you'll strip the threads." Tommy nodded eagerly, adjusting his wrench with the precision of someone grateful for a second chance. Marcus saw something of himself in the kid, determination mixed with vulnerability, the kind of person society often overlooked or discarded. The garage had transformed dramatically since November. National media coverage of the courthouse protest had brought customers from across Central California, many driving hours just to have their vehicles serviced by the mechanic who'd become a symbol of standing up to injustice. The increased business allowed Marcus to hire 2 additional employees and purchase diagnostic equipment he'd previously only dreamed of owning. More importantly, the case had sparked changes throughout Kern County's criminal justice system. District Attorney Patricia Morganton had announced her retirement in January, citing personal reasons that everyone understood as political suicide. Her replacement, former defense attorney David Chen, Rebecca's brother, had implemented new policies requiring enhanced evidence review before filing conspiracy charges. Officer Bradley Hutchins faced a different kind of reckoning. The California Highway Patrol's Internal Affairs Division had launched a comprehensive investigation into his arrest patterns, discovering a troubling history of targeting motorcycle riders without sufficient cause. Hutchins was suspended pending the outcome of a civil rights lawsuit filed by the ACLU on behalf of 12 different bikers who'd been subjected to questionable stops over the past 3 years. Judge Harrison Blackwood had surprised everyone by becoming an unlikely advocate for criminal justice reform. The Rodriguez case had shaken his fundamental beliefs about fairness and the role of prejudice in judicial decisions. He'd begun speaking at law schools across California, using Marcus's story as an example of how unconscious bias could corrupt even well-intentioned legal proceedings. Elena Vasquez visited the garage every Tuesday afternoon, ostensibly to have Marcus check her new Toyota Camry's fluids, but really to share coffee and conversation with the young man who changed her life. She'd become something of a local celebrity herself, speaking at community groups about the importance of standing up for others and trusting in the goodness of strangers. "Marcus, you have a visitor," called out Sandra Lopez, the garage's new office manager. She gestured toward the parking lot, where a familiar figure was climbing off a pristine Harley-Davidson road, King. Rebecca Chen had traded her courtroom attire for jeans and a leather jacket, but her smile remained as bright as it had been on the day Marcus walked out of the courthouse a free man. The attorney had used her newfound fame to establish a non-profit legal clinic specializing in cases involving discrimination against motorcycle riders and other marginalized communities. "Counselor Chen," Marcus grinned, embracing his former attorney. "What brings you to our humble establishment?" "I have news that I thought you'd want to hear in person," Rebecca replied, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "The California State Bar Association has selected your case for their 2025 Civil Rights Award. They want to honor both you and the motorcycle community for demonstrating how peaceful protest can affect real change in the justice system." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his throat, the same emotion that had overwhelmed him when Judge Blackwood dismissed the charges. The recognition meant more than personal vindication. It validated the sacrifice made by 350 bikers who traveled from across the Southwest to support a stranger's fight for justice. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "The governor's office has reached out about appointing you to the newly created Community Police Relations Advisory Board. They want someone with your experience to help bridge the gap between law enforcement and communities that have historically faced discrimination." The offer represented an opportunity Marcus had never imagined possible. 6 months earlier, he'd been facing decades in prison for helping a stranded motorist. Now he was being asked to help reshape the relationship between police and the communities they served. Danny Sullivan's Harley rumbled into the parking lot, followed by a convoy of Devil's Disciples members arriving for their monthly chapter meeting. The garage had become the club's unofficial headquarters, with Marcus serving as road captain and chief mechanic for members throughout the Central Valley. "Brother Marcus," Sullivan called out, dismounting his bike with the satisfied grin of a man who'd witnessed justice prevail. "Hope you've got time to look at my primary chain. She's making some interesting noises on the highway." The relationship between the Devil's Disciples and local law enforcement had improved dramatically since the courthouse protest. Police Chief Amanda Torres had initiated community outreach programs that included motorcycle safety courses and charity rides benefiting local veterans organizations. The clubs had responded by volunteering for community service projects and establishing scholarship funds for at-risk youth. Tiger Jenkins made the drive from Riverside every few weeks, bringing updates from clubs throughout Southern California. The Marcus Rodriguez model of peaceful protest had been adopted by biker communities facing discrimination in other jurisdictions. Legal victories in San Bernardino, Orange County, and Fresno could all trace their strategies back to that November day in Bakersfield. The Phoenix Thunderbirds want to invite you to their annual charity ride next month, Jenkins told Marcus while examining a custom paint job on a customer's Sportster. Carlos Diesel Moreno says you're welcome anytime in Arizona. They consider you family now. The sense of extended brotherhood had been one of the most unexpected benefits of Marcus's ordeal. His garage had become a way station for traveling bikers, many of whom detoured through Bakersfield specifically to meet the mechanic whose case had united their community. The walls were covered with patches, photographs, and thank you notes from clubs across the western United States. Tommy Guerrero approached with a question about the transmission rebuild, his young face eager and attentive. Marcus had discovered that teaching came naturally to him, whether explaining mechanical concepts to employees or describing civil rights principles to law students visiting from nearby colleges. The key is patience, Marcus explained, guiding Tommy through the process of aligning gears. Rush the job, and you'll create problems that take twice as long to fix. Same principle applies whether you're rebuilding an engine or rebuilding trust in the community. As evening approached, the garage filled with the familiar sounds of brotherhood, motorcycles being serviced, stories being shared, and plans being made for upcoming rides and events. The Devil's Disciples had grown from a local club to a regional organization, with new chapters forming in communities where bikers faced harassment or discrimination. Elena Vasquez arrived for her weekly visit, bringing homemade tamales for the crew and updates on her grandson's soccer season. The elderly teacher had become the unofficial grandmother of the motorcycle community, bridging generational and cultural gaps with her warmth and wisdom. "Mijo," she said to Marcus, handing him a plate of food, "I saw you on the news again. My neighbors are so proud to know someone famous." Marcus laughed, the same humble laugh that had endeared him to supporters during his trial. "Mrs. Vasquez, I'm just a mechanic who got lucky. The real heroes are the people who stood up when it mattered." But Elena shook her head firmly. "Heroes are made by their choices, not their circumstances. You chose to help a stranger on a dark highway. Your friends chose to travel hundreds of miles to support you. Good choices create good people, and good people create change." As the sun set over Bakersfield, casting long shadows across the garage floor, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The false arrest that had threatened to destroy his life had instead revealed the power of community, the importance of standing up for justice, and the truth that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept injustice. The Rodriguez case had become more than a legal victory. It had become a blueprint for how marginalized communities could organize, protest peacefully, and demand fair treatment from institutions that had previously ignored their voices. Law schools studied it, civil rights organizations cited it, and motorcycle clubs across the nation had adopted its strategies for their own battles against discrimination. Most importantly, it had proven that sometimes the most powerful force in America isn't money or political connections, but simple human decency backed by the courage to act when action is needed. 1 year after the courthouse protest that changed everything, Marcus Rodriguez stood at the podium of the California State Capitol building, looking out at an audience that would have been unimaginable during his darkest days in Kern County Jail. Legislators, civil rights leaders, law enforcement officials, and motorcycle club representatives filled the ornate chamber. Where the Marcus Rodriguez Civil Rights Protection Act was about to be signed into law, Governor Sarah Martinez adjusted the microphone as she prepared to deliver remarks. Before the historic signing, the legislation, born from Marcus's case, would require enhanced training for law enforcement officers on implicit bias, establish independent review boards for cases involving alleged discrimination, and create legal protections for Good Samaritans helping stranded motorists. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Martinez began. We gather today to transform a grave injustice into lasting progress. The case of Marcus Rodriguez exposed flaws in our criminal justice system that demanded immediate and comprehensive reform. In the front row, Elena Vasquez sat proudly wearing her finest dress, the same one she'd worn to her retirement ceremony from the Delano School District. At 69, she had become an unexpected activist, speaking at universities and community centers about the power of bearing witness to injustice. Her testimony during Marcus's trial had been studied in ethics courses and legal seminars across the state. Rebecca Chen, now director of the California Motorcycle Rights Legal Defense Fund, sat beside Elena, her organization having grown from a one-person operation into a statewide network of attorneys specializing in discrimination cases. The fund had successfully litigated dozens of cases involving wrongful arrests, profiling incidents, and civil rights violations against motorcycle riders. Danny Sullivan represented the unified voice of California's motorcycle clubs, which had formed an unprecedented coalition following the Bakersfield demonstration. The Devil's Disciples, Iron Wolves, Sacramento Saints, Phoenix Thunderbirds, and even traditionally isolated groups like the Hells Angels had created the Brotherhood Alliance for Civil Rights, with Sullivan serving as its first elected president. The Marcus Rodriguez case proved that when communities unite behind principles of justice and fairness, they can move mountains, Sullivan had testified during legislative hearings. We're not asking for special treatment, we're demanding equal treatment under the law. Tommy Guerrero, now Marcus's business partner and co-owner of Rodriguez and Guerrero Automotive Services, operated the live stream equipment, broadcasting the ceremony to motorcycle clubs nationwide. The young man who'd arrived at the garage with nothing but a backpack had earned his associate degree in automotive technology and become a respected voice in the community's efforts to help at-risk youth. The business had evolved far beyond a simple repair shop. The facility now included a training center where former inmates and aging-out foster youth learned valuable mechanical skills while earning industry certifications. Marcus's philosophy of second chances had created opportunities for dozens of young people who might otherwise have struggled to find their place in society. Judge Harrison Blackwood occupied a seat in the legislative gallery, his presence serving as a powerful symbol of personal transformation. The man who had nearly sentenced an innocent person to decades in prison had become one of the state's most vocal advocates for judicial reform. His book, Blind Justice: How Prejudice Nearly Destroyed an Innocent Man, had become required reading in law schools nationwide. I attended today's ceremony because I owe Marcus Rodriguez and the motorcycle community an unpayable debt, Blackwood had written in a recent op-ed. Their courage in the face of injustice forced me to confront my own biases and become a better judge and a better human being. Officer Bradley Hutchins was noticeably absent from the ceremony. Following his termination from the California Highway Patrol and the settlement of multiple civil rights lawsuits, he had moved to a different state and taken a job in private security. His personnel file had become a case study in how unchecked bias and abuse of authority could destroy both careers and lives. Patricia Morganton's political legacy had become permanently tied to prosecutorial overreach and the miscarriage of justice. Her successor, David Chen, had implemented the most comprehensive reforms in Kern County's history, including mandatory bias training, community oversight panels, and strict requirements for evidence review before filing conspiracy charges. The ceremony's most powerful moment came when Marcus approached the podium to address the assembled dignitaries and activists. The mechanic, who had never sought the spotlight, wore a simple suit and tie, his Devil's Disciples pin prominently displayed on his lapel, a symbol of the brotherhood that had saved his life and changed his destiny. Honorable Governor Martinez, Distinguished legislators and fellow citizens, Marcus began, his voice carrying the quiet strength that had sustained him through his ordeal. 1 year ago, I was facing life in prison for the crime of helping a stranded motorist. Today, we're ensuring that no other person will face such injustice simply because of how they dress, what they ride, or which community they belong to. The audience erupted in applause, with motorcycle club members throughout the chamber standing in recognition. The sound echoed through the historic building, where so many important decisions affecting California's 40 million residents had been made throughout the state's history. Marcus continued, his words carrying beyond the immediate audience to the thousands watching online. This legislation isn't just about bikers or motorcycles. It's about the fundamental American principle that justice should be blind to everything except the truth. It's about protecting people who stop to help strangers, regardless of what vehicle they drive or what clothes they wear. Elena Vasquez wiped tears from her eyes as she remembered that rainy night on Highway 58, when a young man in leather had selflessly stopped to help her. She had never imagined that her decision to testify truthfully would contribute to statewide legal reforms protecting thousands of future good. Samaritans, the governor, signed the Marcus Rodriguez Civil Rights Protection Act into law using multiple pens, distributing them to key supporters as ceremonial keepsakes. Marcus received the first pen, while Elena, Rebecca, Danny, and Judge Blackwood each received others. The moment was captured by photographers and broadcast live to news networks across the nation. Following the ceremony, a reception in the Capitol Rotunda brought together unlikely allies who had found common ground through shared commitment to justice. Police chiefs conversed with motorcycle club presidents about community policing strategies. Civil rights attorneys shared war stories with reformed judges about the ongoing fight against institutional bias. Tiger Jenkins had traveled from Riverside with a delegation from Southern California clubs, bringing news of similar legislative initiatives being considered in Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. The California model of motorcycle rights protection was spreading across the western United States, with other states studying the Rodriguez case as a template for their own reforms. This is just the beginning. Jenkins told a reporter from the Sacramento Bee, every state in America needs these protections. Every community deserves to know that helping your neighbor won't result in false arrest and prosecution. Carlos Diesel Moreno represented the Phoenix Thunderbirds and the broader Arizona motorcycle community, which had successfully lobbied for their state legislature to introduce similar protective legislation. The network of relationships forged during the Bakersfield Courthouse protest had evolved into a sophisticated political alliance, capable of influencing policy across multiple states. The ceremony concluded with a group photograph on the Capitol steps, featuring an image that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. A diverse coalition of lawmakers, judges, police officials, civil rights leaders, and motorcycle club members united in their commitment to equal justice under law. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus found himself walking through the Capitol Gardens with Elena Vasquez, their conversation flowing as naturally as it had during their weekly coffee meetings at the garage. The elderly teacher had become more than a friend. She was a mentor whose wisdom and moral clarity had helped guide Marcus through his transformation from wrongly accused defendant to civil rights advocate. "Mijo, your father would be so proud," Elena said, her voice filled with the warmth that had comforted thousands of students during her teaching career. "You've taken something terrible and used it to help other people. That's what good people do. They turn their pain into purpose." Marcus nodded, thinking about the journey that had brought him from that dark highway to the bright halls of political power. The false arrest that had threatened to destroy. His life had instead revealed his true calling as a voice for justice, and a bridge between communities that had historically viewed each other with suspicion. The Marcus Rodriguez Story had become more than a tale of individual triumph over injustice. It had evolved into a blueprint for how ordinary citizens could organize, advocate, and achieve meaningful reform in systems that seemed impermeable to change. Law schools would study it for decades. Civil rights organizations would cite it as a model for effective grassroots activism. Most importantly, future Good Samaritans would be protected by laws that ensured kindness would never again be criminalized. As the sun set over Sacramento, Marcus Rodriguez, former defendant, current business owner, and future civil rights leader, looked forward to whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful force in America is simply refusing to accept that injustice is inevitable. The boy who had learned to fix engines in his father's garage had grown into a man capable of fixing broken systems. One case, one law, and one act of courage at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.